there's so many different angles and so many different factors and so many different things that have shaped what we understand and experience as yoga now today. If you're standing in the supermarket and somebody says the word yoga to you, there's some kind of common recognition. And there's so much that goes into that, what has brought us to that point where that word means something. And when I was thinking about what to say, where to start, how to, what to offer, the first thing, it's like there's so much information, and I'm going to share some information and I'm going to talk about information, but the most important thing is that you know that you are the light in the darkness, that you know that who you experience yourself to be is just a thin layer, and beneath that is this vast, eternal radiance that never stops shining, and that the source of your wisdom is not from outside. It's not from books. It's not from teachers. It's not from ideas and concepts. It's from inside you. And there's a point of interface where you interact with something outside you that carries the vibration of your deeper self, and it sparks something and it draws you into relationship with yourself. But that's not because of the outside thing. It's nothing was created. Nothing was given to you that you don't already have. And I think this is the fundamental, I won't say misunderstanding, but misrepresentation of yoga and yoga teaching and yoga teachers, is that a yoga teacher can give you something that you don't already have. All throughout the past 100, I mean, it goes back farther than this, but the past 100 or so years, that yoga has been really flowing more steadily from the East into the West. There's also this mixture of yoga with extractive capitalism. And that has shaped what we understand yoga to be, the mixing of yoga with extractive capitalism. And extractive capitalism has some basic fundamental aspects. Resource extraction. And, I just want to say that extractive capitalism is like the water. It's like the analogy of the fish and the water. It is so embedded into our world and our consciousness that it's hard for us to imagine what life would be like without it. It's so taken for granted. It's so part of our common understanding of what reality is, that it's hard for us to imagine life without it. But that doesn't mean it's not possible for life to exist without it. It's very possible. But right now, in the world, in America, in the West, it's very taken for granted. And these elements of resource extraction, that resources exist to be extracted, we talk in some circles about the fundamental integrity of life, the fundamental integrity of the earth. But we act and live mostly as if resources exist to be extracted. We take things for granted. We take food for granted. We take fuel for granted. And we take wisdom for granted. The teachings of yoga have been cultivated, steeped, prepared, baked over the course of thousands of years, channeled through endless guru-shishya relationships, teacher-student pathways, traditions, and they flow to us. They have flown through endless numbers of people. Just like a piece of fruit that you eat, the seed was planted, and the tree was grown, and the fruit was picked, and the fruit was stored and transported and put on the shelf, and all those things, especially the more processed a food is, the more people are involved with it. So just like you can think of an apple while you're eating it, you can think of all the love and the care that has gone into it. The same is true with the teachings of yoga. They didn't just drop out of the sky. All these texts didn't just, appear out of nowhere. They were painstakingly and laboriously held, created, crafted, and offered. And extractive capitalism denies this, ignores it, doesn't pay any attention to it. The other thing that it does is it exploits labor, which is, similar. There's all this labor that has gone into it. It treats yoga as a resource to be extracted, something to be kind of taken, and all the fruit of the labor that created it to be taken for granted. And this is the commodification of yoga. It's the commercialization of yoga, which again, we live in a world where this is taken for granted, that yoga is a commodity. It's something that you can buy. It's something that you can sell. The whole yoga studio model is based on the idea that yoga is a commodity and that yoga can be commercialized. Externalizing costs, short-term thinking, these are basic fundamental aspects of extractive capitalism. We need the quickest short-term gain possible, not thinking about the long term, not thinking about what we're doing in the context of yoga and its impact on life and the future and the evolution of the earth and the sustainability of the earth. And, I'm obviously not talking in black and white terms, but this is the tendency it's the milieu in which we're living. The concentration of wealth and power, white supremacy, the legacy of colonialism. These are all aspects of extractive capitalism that influence what we experience as yoga today. And the lack of accountability and lack of regulation, the idea that anybody can just call themselves a yoga teacher. I mean, of course, there's the Yoga Alliance certification. But if you think about the history of yoga and the depth and the vastness of what the tradition has to offer, the certification process of a Yoga Alliance framed training doesn't necessarily require that anybody touch that, appreciate that, honor that. So this isn't to make you feel guilty or ashamed. It's really just a plain and honest picture of the situation in which we're in. Because unless we face ourselves, there's nothing that we're going to do about it. Unless we take a good hard look at what's going on, then we have less choice. Facing ourselves squarely gives us more choice. The truth of yoga, as I have asserted many times over the past several months, is that it's a set of practices that supports movement on a path towards a destination. And that destination is wholeness. And that destination is the truth, our true nature, and unification and alignment of all aspects of ourselves and all aspects of our individuality with the oneness that holds all, that integrates all separate individualities. This is the destination of yoga, and commodification and commercialization and capitalism all push in the opposite direction. They're not resonant with the truth of yoga. They're not supportive of the path of yoga. And so, a friend of mine, I don't think this is printed anywhere, and I think this just came kind of verbally to me, but and the way I remember it is a friend of mine was talking to Jon Kabat-Zinn, and he was fundamentally involved in the development of mindfulness meditation. He's written several books, And he was really involved in UMass Medical Center's first trials, scientific trials with mindfulness meditation and stress reduction. So he was part of creating the mindfulness-based stress reduction programs that are so ubiquitous. And somebody was asking him how he felt about this, ancient spiritual tradition being kind of, I don't know, kind of cut up, chopped up, and neatly packaged for a modern audience, and wasn't something being lost. And my understanding is that he said it took the Dharma 1,000 years to get to China, which basically implies like it's all good. It's all flowing. I don't expect to be the one to make this happen. I'm just a small kind of little piece of driftwood floating on the current. And that the flow of wisdom in the context of yoga, the flow of wisdom, the truth of yoga is flowing from the East into the West, and it will continue to do so. And whatever the kind of currents that are shaping the flow, they're not going to ultimately stop it. The current flows according to the winds, according to the tides and the weather and the ecosystem, and it flows according to the topography. You can think of the current events as the weather, and you can think of culture as the topography. So there's certain things, cultural realities that yoga is colliding with as the waves of yoga flow from the East to the West. And it's mixing with different cultural realities as it goes. But this is short term, and it's not long term. And that, as Jon Kabat-Zinn's implying, that the truth eventually will flow and more fully. There's a lot of these cultural factors that determine this flow. And mindfulness is one of them. The evolution of the mindfulness movement is part of the evolution of the yoga movement. They've been concurrent and, informed each other. The same thing with aerobics. The development of aerobics and the development of the mindfulness movement both had this kind of similar effect. Somatics, embodiment, fitness culture, which was a thing in the early, I guess maybe late 1800s into the early 1900s. People thinking about being fit and healthy. Actually, when I took a mindfulness-based stress reduction program, one of the things that they were kind of talking about, teaching in the context of that program, was that, now it's obvious to us that jogging or going for a walk or these kind of basic exercise elements are part of a healthy life, and that wasn't always the case. That came about as a part of the development of fitness culture. And there was a whole evolution of that understanding within the health community and within the public at large. And in this MBSR training, what they were saying was that mindfulness, meditation, could follow the same route. It could get to the point where everybody recognizes that, in order to be healthy, you have to meditate. And today, I took that training maybe 15 years ago, or at least 10 years ago. And now my very mainstream pork and beans eating father meditates every day. He does the New York Times crossword puzzle every day, and he meditates every day. So that's how far it's kind of steeped into the mainstream culture. And I think there's a lot of people like that who have even a 5-minute daily meditation practice. So this is, concurrent with the evolution, and fitness culture and mindfulness culture. They have to do with the understanding that what it is to be healthy Health requires taking care of ourselves, nurturing ourselves. And the movement of yoga is a part of that in a positive way. It's a recognition that we're embodied beings and we have to take care of our bodies and our minds, and that yoga can be a support for that. Where things go a bit haywire is when it becomes about getting better. I have to be not just healthier, but there's this pressure to be better, stronger, smarter, more successful, more attractive, all these pressures that are inherently involved with egoism and the existence of the ego, domination and competitiveness and all these things, but also very much involved with our culture. The obsession with beauty, the obsession with health and fitness and all these things. And the idea that if you have them all, then you will live a good life. And if you don't have them all, then you will live a bad life. And so this sense of pressure, and it becomes another box to tick and another thing that we use to either feel better about ourselves or feel worse about ourselves, the kind of swing on the polarity of ego. I'm a terrible person because I didn't do yoga today. I'm a really good person because I did yoga today. When the reality, as I said at the beginning, is that those polarities are not at all real. And yoga, in a way, the flow of wisdom inevitably is centrifugal. It's flowing outward. In the past, yogis would hide from people. It's kind of like, in order to be famous, in order to be successful, you have to be famous. Everybody has to know you. You have to have all these like followers, and you have to, everybody's got followers now. Whether it's TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or whatever, we're all counting our followers. Yogis used to hide. They would go to the Himalayas. They would act crazy so people would leave them alone. They didn't want followers. They wanted people to go away because they were seeking inside. They were seeking the depth of their inner being, and they didn't want to be distracted. So now we have this movement, and the secret that the teachings of yoga were kept secret for this reason. They were kept secret to keep them pure and to keep so that people would be engaging with them who really were ready to focus on that. There is a movement that's happening now that is centrifugal. The teachings are flowing out, and this is also part of the evolution of consciousness on Earth. This is part of the greater movement of awareness on the planet. It's a positive thing. The teachings are flowing out. And on the individual level, the teachings of yoga have to be centripetal. They have to flow in, because that's where we each realize who we are, is on, inside, and that inside connects with the outside. The connection with our deeper being touches the deeper being of the cosmos. We realize that there's only one deeper being inside us and in the entire cosmos. There's only one breath. There's only one heartbeat. There's only one movement of love. And it lives inside of us, it moves inside of us, and it flows through the entire universe. That's the nature of self-realization. So the teachings on the outside, externally, are flowing outwards from the individual to the masses, to more people and more people and more people. And they flow through these currents of consciousness. And again, this is where this interface. And this is why it's not about feeling guilty or feeling badly about the current milieu, because there's not really another way for it to happen. The teachings have to flow through the actual currents of consciousness as they are, as they exist right now. And simultaneously, on an individual level, they draw us into ourselves. And so there's this breath, this flowing out and this flowing in. And what it ultimately is a saturation. It's a movement of wisdom through all the layers of reality, all the layers of existence. So one of the casualties, one of the consequences of all of this is there are yoga teachers who claim to be or use the banner of yoga, who become powerful, who become wealthy, who are kind of either intentionally in some cases and very consciously involved in extractive capitalism, or just kind of mixed up because that's, this is the world that they're existing in. And there are, it's not always possible to tell, but some people are a bit more blatant about their intentions. Bikram Choudhury, for example, comes to mind as somebody who was fairly clear about what he was doing the whole time. He didn't really pretend to be not amassing a lot of money and personal fame and personal power at the expense of other people. And he was a yogi. He used the banner of yoga to enrich himself and to abuse people. So that's one of the consequences of this confluence. In the past, yogis were, more selective and more hidden and more subterranean. And there would be movements and there would be times, I think it's, it would be silly to say that sort of thing. the Bikram Choudhury phenomenon is probably fairly unique in a lot of different ways. And if you aren't familiar, you can just Google Bikram, and I'm sure or ask ChatGPT, who is Bikram Choudhury, and you'll learn some things. There's a movie about him on Netflix, and Bikram Yoga, which you've probably heard of, was created by him. In the past, in the texts, in some of the ancient texts, there are specific, teachings saying, be careful of teachers who, aggrandize themselves, who are kind of building a power structure. So this is not an entirely new phenomenon, but the kind of common cultural milieu of extractive capitalism is, to the degree that it's happening now, especially in the West, is new. And I think that's why we see so many different abuses of power within the yoga space. And especially, over the past few years, there's a lot of things that have come to light, a lot of past abuses of power that have been revealed, whether it's Yogi Bhajan in the Kundalini yoga community, or Patabi Joyce, or John Friend, or Amrit Desai from Kripalu. Many, many different scandals and circumstances of abuse of power. And I don't, each one of these situations is unique. And basically everything that I know about them is hearsay because I was not involved personally in any of the situations. But you can see from the general information that is available, you can see this interface between yoga and capitalism, extractive capitalism, power, wealth, accumulation of personal gain at the expense of others, short-term gain, all these things. And what all that is a distraction, because it has nothing to do with yoga. Yoga maintains its integrity and its purity in the midst of all of that. And just because there are 100 or 1,000 people who are abusing yoga and misusing yoga, that doesn't in any way negate the actual true yoga gurus who have for thousands of years cultivated and carried the wisdom of yoga through time and brought it here. And I think that's one of the big shames of the modern situation, is that people have decided that because they've seen so many examples of abuse of power within the yoga space, that every guru is a charlatan. Every guru is a liar and an abuser of power. And that just flies in the face of the entire thing. And in a way, it's a desecration and a kind of, it's not yoga. It's like a rejection of the whole kit and caboodle. And it's not just that all the, that there were yoga teachers and yoga gurus from the past that carried this wisdom through time. There are yoga teachers and yoga gurus today existing who have integrity, who have sincerity, and who are not involved in this kind of aggrandizement. There was a time at the Sri Aurobindo ashram when apparently some siddhis started appearing for people who were living there. They started having capacities to see into the future, or to read other people's thoughts, or to, just kind of bend the laws of physics. And Sri Aurobindo shut it down and said, that's not what we're doing here. And a lot of people left the ashram at that time. And he also would say, we don't want anybody coming over here and just kind of joining up. That's not the point. The point is that we're working in the unconscious layers of humanity's psyche and trying to support collective purification by facing and dealing with the darkness that's hidden there. This is hard work. This is difficult. This is not a glamour, a fun, exciting ride. When there was one disciple from the Sri Aurobindo ashram that came to America and ended up becoming the guru of several people, including Carlos Santana and John McLaughlin. His name was, he was also a bodybuilder. And I forget what his name was, but when he came to America, Chinmoy. When he came to America, the mother said, don't tell anybody where you came from. Because she had a sense that that's where he was headed. He was headed for Hollywood. And she said, don't tell anybody where you came from. And he didn't. So there is that, there are teachers who kind of maintain that commitment to integrity. And you can feel it. And this is the thing. I think we have this, especially those of us who grew up in the David Koresh era, the era of cults being stormed by the ATF and people blowing themselves up in gunfights and all that stuff. The word cult came into my consciousness at that time. And the people that drank the Kool-Aid and committed mass suicide. There's these ideas that we have about what a cult is that are derived from these kinds of situations. And these situations are real and they happened. And at the same time, there is a sincerity and a commitment to integrity that exists within spiritual traditions and micro spiritual communities and macro spiritual communities. And the fact that the negative things exist doesn't disprove the existence of the positive things. So just quickly summarizing these different factors and kind of in a historical way, colonialism, especially the British, Portuguese, and French were the main colonizers of India. That was in a way it was not the first point of interface, but it was a big point of interface between the West and India and the history of yoga. And there were some British at that time who really appreciated the yoga tradition. Ralph Griffith in 1889 translated the Rig Veda, Samhita, which is a huge text. And it's pretty much still the main translation that you'll find out there 125 years later. Max Mueller in 1859, starting in 1859, throughout the 1860s, wrote many commentaries on things like the Dhammapada and the Rig Veda and the Upanishads. These people were serious. They were scholars and they really wanted to understand yoga. But what they brought was a scholarly attitude, an intellectual academic attitude, an anthropological attitude. And some of them kind of got drawn more into the depth of yoga as a reality as they studied it, because yoga has that effect. But, that there was this kind of like, we understand and we can interpret what is going on, what the symbols of the Rig Veda mean, what the symbols of the Upanishads mean. We have the academic authority to interpret these things. And so we're going to do it, as opposed to a direct immersion. And of course, there were British people who became authentic yogis, who took sannyas, who became, joined orders of monks, joined ashrams throughout time as well. But as far as what the public knew, it was mostly from academics. And then in 1893, Vivekananda came to America, and he was interfacing with religion. So we have colonialism and academia and intellectualization, and then we have religion. The Parliament of World Religions in Chicago in 1893, the purpose of it was that a bunch of Christian people were like, let's get people from all these religions together, and then we can show them why Christianity is the best religion. And Vivekananda spoke at this Parliament of World Religions and received like a 5-minute nonstop standing ovation after his talk. And so the sense is that the people who had convened the thing weren't quite expecting that. They weren't expecting a non-Christian speaker to captivate the audience. But he did. And so he's there interfacing with religion and religiosity, and also wanting just to share what he had experienced. His guru was Paramahansa Ramakrishna, and who was an incredible being. And he wanted to share the depth that he had received from his guru with as many people as possible. And he really was the one to introduce the kind of Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga as the framework. He introduced the Yoga Sutras because he thought that the second pada of the Yoga Sutras, the sadhana pada, was digestible for people with the 8 limbs of yoga. So this was in the 1890s, and he didn't live very long, but over that period of time around there, he influenced a lot of people. And the Ramakrishna Mission was something that he created, and there's a lot of them in India, but there's several branches in the US as well. And they put out a lot of publications, a lot of books about Vedanta, about yoga in general. So there's this kind of seeping out of this wisdom. And then there's then there is Paramahansa Yogananda, who also came, a few years later in the 1920s to the US, and Autobiography of a Yogi, his book. And, so then there's more that's starting to come in. And through this time, again, there's fitness culture. So fitness culture is happening in the US, and it's also happening kind of around the world. And the gymnastics and bodybuilding and these kinds of things are becoming popular. And apparently there was an interface between the Hatha yoga traditions of India and the gymnastics cultures of Europe. There was kind of a space where these things were swirling around. And one of the key figures in that is a person named Tirumalai Krishnamacharya. He was born in I think 1899. And he is if there's one person who influenced modern yoga the most, what we understand as modern yoga the most, it's probably him. He taught BKS Iyengar, he taught Pattabhi Jois, he taught Indra Devi, and he taught Desikachar. So as kind of just four main examples, Iyengar went on to create Iyengar Yoga. Pattabhi Jois was the developer of Ashtanga Yoga. And Ashtanga Yoga is where you have this formula where you walk into the room, you set up your mats in a row, and you do sun salutations. And there's a beginning, a warm-up period, there's the sun salutations, and then there's the closing postures or the finishing postures. So that format, that framework, you come in, you pay, the teacher tells you what to do, you do what the teacher says. It's these kind of moving vinyasa type things. This is basically Pattabhi Jois's contribution. There's some indication that Krishnamacharya was teaching some of the same stuff and Iyengar was doing some of the same stuff. Iyengar went more in the direction of static postures, staying in postures for a long time, and using a lot of props and things like that. Right, and yoga therapy. Whereas Pattabhi Jois was this kind of active vinyasa yoga, where if you go to any city in the country and you go to a yoga studio and you take a yoga class, most likely, I think it's going to be a vinyasa class. I'm just saying percentage-wise, the likelihood. I'm not saying that they're all like that. There's a lot of diversity out there. But if you just, randomly go to some place and take some class, it probably has this sense of vinyasa to it. And that was created by Pattabhi Jois. So Krishnamacharya is interfacing with, he's basically he intentionally took these Hatha Yoga practices, these asanas and pranayamas from Hatha Yoga, and integrated them with gymnastics moves and created these vinyasas, these flows of movement. And he also was involved with yoga therapy and using different postures and different flows of postures, sequences of postures for specific ailments and specific things. And he went on speaking tours, and he, within India, was really promoting this as a thing. And he would take his Iyengar and Pattabhi Jois and his students, and they would do demonstrations. They would do postural demonstrations for people. So it was kind of like a show. And at some point, somebody brought Iyengar to Europe. I think it was I have written somewhere here, 1952. Iyengar went to London with this famous cello player. And this is where, before that, people were coming and starting to study with Krishnamacharya. And Indra Devi also was a woman who came and studied with him. And she went back to California. She had been living all over the world, demanded, because Krishnamacharya wasn't teaching women. So she very persistently demanded that he teach her and convinced him, and he did. And then she ended up in California and became one of the first yoga teachers in California. And that was in the 1940s. So that's before Iyengar. So Indra Devi studied with Krishnamacharya in the 1920s and 30s, came to California in the 1940s and started teaching yoga. Iyengar gets brought to London in the 1950s. Pattabhi Jois comes to Encinitas, California in 1964 and starts teaching there. So this is like Krishnamacharya's lineage is flowing out, or his teachings are flowing out in that kind of a way. In the 1960s and 70s in California, there was a movement of Ashtanga Yoga and Indra Devi's style of yoga that she had also learned from Krishnamacharya. So this was happening at that time. There's so many different facets, and there's no way that I can give a complete overview, because there's like these big, like that Krishnamacharya is like one big collective flow. And then there's somebody like Swami Shivananda and the Divine Life Society. And he wrote many books, and, that he also, Swami Satchidananda, who spoke at Woodstock in 1969, who offered a meditation and, became very popular at that time. He was a student of Swami Shivananda. So that's happening simultaneously to Krishnamacharya in some ways. Neem Karoli Baba, in the 1960s, a lot of people from the West, the hippies, are all going to India overland through Afghanistan and kind of landing in different places and finding different gurus. And the Beatles go and they find Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and people encounter Swami Muktananda, and people encounter Neem Karoli Baba in the north, and people come down south and connect with the Sri Aurobindo and the Sri Aurobindo ashram. Ramana Maharshi also, I mean, he died in 1950, but there were, prior to that whole hippie movement, there were people from the West who had come down and met him. He never left India. Anandamayi Ma never left India, but she lived until the 1986. And so she, people who were coming through into India at that time met her. People who were in the hippie time met the mother. She passed away in 1973. So, people from the West are coming overland into India and having all these different experiences with all these different spiritual teachers over there. And then they're coming back to the West with books and photographs. And then sometimes they bring the teacher back to the West with them. Baba Haridas was, he's in Be Here Now. A picture of him is in Be Here Now. He was Ram Dass's yoga teacher. He was the one who was teaching Ram Dass the kind of fundamentals of asana and pranayama and these basic practices. And so somebody at some point brought him back. He was with Neem Karoli Baba, living at the Neem Karoli Baba ashram. Somebody brought him back and he established an ashram in California. So, there's this mixing that's happening. And Krishnamacharya did not invent asana. Baba Haridas was teaching Ram Dass asana. Swami Shivananda was teaching asana. There's different places where people were doing asanas, but this particular application for particular health maladies, and this vinyasa yoga thing mostly are the two things that mostly came from that tradition. And then, there's Osho, and there's Guru Mai was the kind of next in the lineage after Muktananda, and John Friend and Anusara Yoga and Douglas Brooks and Christopher Wallace. A lot of the Tantra yoga scholars came out of that tradition. Or were connected to that tradition, and Yogi Bhajan and the Kundalini yoga movement in the US. And there's Amma, the hugging Amma, who, she just, when she goes on tour, she goes from place to place to place to place and does event after event after event after event. And what she's doing at those events has nothing to do with asana, but she's teaching meditation, and she's embodying divine love. She's saying, I will hug anyone. I will embrace anyone. Every single person deserves to be embraced. Every single person deserves love. She's not saying that. I mean, she is saying it, but she's also just doing it. And this is yoga, the recognition that there is no caste, there is no higher and lower. There is no, when it comes to the value of a basic value of a person, that the movement of wisdom and love is through the divine towards all. And it's natural and it just flows that way. It's like gravity. She's demonstrating that. And she just goes from place to place to place to place and just demonstrates that. And it's kind of seeding this reality all over the US and Europe and the world.
That's amazing.
And then, I mentioned aerobics. With the aerobics culture, there's also somatics. Aerobics got famous from, what's her name? Jane Fonda. She made aerobics famous in the 80s, but it was developed in the 1960s. It's the same as somatics. So it's kind of basic, kind of taking fitness culture a little bit deeper from let's just be fit and healthy to what is this body actually? What does it mean to inhabit a physical form? what is the function of my bones? Not in an intellectual way, but like, what are they doing in there? And like, can I feel that the word soma means a body experienced from the inside, a body experienced as, not from an outside, like a doctor looking at a patient. And, we can look at ourselves that way. I can look at my own arm the way a doctor would look at a patient's arm. Or I can experience my arm from the inside. That's somatization. Somatization, I don't know. Probably not sure which word is real, but the soma is the body experience from the inside. And so this science, this kind of teaching of somatics evolved around this same time. And this flowed into the movement of yoga from the east to the west. All these concurrent things are happening. They're all bubbling up. They're all mixing. They're all churning. And they're all producing this current reality that we live in. So Bonnie, obviously, Bainbridge Cohen was a big teacher and again, she also says things, but the teaching of Bonnie is to be experienced. She embodies, she is the teaching. She conveys and transmits what she's experiencing. Here we are today, and you can go around and you can use the word yoga and you can find different permutations of it, different manifestations of it all around the world in different places. And, people can use that word in all kinds of different ways. The Hare Krishna movement, I didn't mention, but that's a whole, thing unto itself. This guy shows up, has a heart attack on the boat and shows up in Boston Harbor in the 1970s and starts a worldwide movement of people singing Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Just sing God's name, and that's all you need to do. That's the whole teaching of the whole movement. And love and praise and worship God, serve people. They feed people. They take care of, it's just like giving and loving God. So that's all a part of this milieu also. This is what we're entering into. This is what we've got. And you each are going to go out and take this teaching and manifest it in your own unique way. And that's good. That's important. That's what has to happen. There's no other way to do it. And what you're going to manifest is what you have absorbed, the interface of what you have absorbed and taken in with who you are, with the depth of your own self-exploration. And that's going to come through you, and it's going to be shared with people. So there's this big macro wave of wisdom and yoga that's flowing from the east to the west. And there's this, you are a part of that. And without you, it requires people. It can't happen without people. And you are one of those people. And that's important. And energy like that doesn't flow in a linear way. It's not like the number of people. You're 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 1,000,000 or whatever. It doesn't happen like that. That's not how holism works. You're part of a whole. And what you do ripples out throughout the whole and influences it in unseen and nonlinear ways. So there's this broader picture, and then there's this embodied yoga space. There's Shraddha yoga space. And we have kind of provided you with a particular set of teachings and a particular set of practices that are unique to us, that are unique to what we have absorbed and what we have experienced in our journey of self-exploration. And the main tributaries, not at all exclusive, but the main tributaries of our accumulated experience are Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, and the kind of Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, BMC, Patty Townsend movement of that Embodied Yoga grew out of, and Guruji Ma. And also Corinne was originally trained by Baba Haridas. in California. So, you know, and then there's like our experience in Tamil Nadu of being there with the yogis and swamis that are alive right now and experiencing the temples and the vibration of Arunachala Shiva and these things. So this is all kind of drawn up into us, interfacing with our unique explorations and flowing out in an offering to you. And I'd like to just take a little bit of time right now for you to reflect on the contours of that in your own life right now. What is your unique offering? It does not have to look like my offering or Corinne's offering or Dory's offering or Catherine's offering or Heidi's offering or anybody's offering, Patty's offering, whoever you admire as a teacher. It doesn't have to look like that because it's you. So what is it that you feel you have absorbed? What have you been drawn to? What have you been most inspired by, most attracted to, most enthusiastic about in the general teachings of yoga that you've experienced so far? And what is unique about you in what you have to offer? What is your unique way? What unique, it's not like there's skills and then there's like inclinations that each of us has.